So I recently had the pleasure of speaking to New York Times bestselling author Ellie Marney about both the art of writing crime thrillers and also about the business of traditionally publishing versus self-publishing. She just self-published the third book in her New York Times bestselling series, None Shall Sleep. And in this video, I pick her brain about why she had made that decision, what led her to choosing self-publishing, what her experience with self-publishing was, what her experience traditionally publishing was. And she took me behind the scenes of the business a little bit and shared a lot about her experience with publishing. So that is what we're talking about in this video today. If you want to go watch us talk about crime thrillers and craft stuff, I posted that interview a couple of weeks ago and it should be one of my most recent videos. Okay, so let's just dive right in.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So I was very surprised to learn that you self-published or that you were planning to self-publish All Shall Mourn. And I would just love to know and hear the story as to why the first two books in the series were traditionally published and then you decided to self-publish the third one, because I'm sure
Mhm.
there were some reasons and things going on there.
Reasons. There were reasons, all right. Okay, so the first book, None to Sleep, there it is, came out in 2020 and it was bought by Little Brown and it was bought out of for a very medium to low advance. It was very hard sell, actually.
Oh,
It's a
really?
why, yeah. I mean, to me, it seemed like a bit of a no-brainer, like a YA version of Silence of the Lambs, but
Yeah.
also it's quite violent, and
Mhm.
there's plenty of gore and things like that at different
Yeah.
times. It's also very dark, the themes.
Mhm.
So I think we pitched it to like 25 publishers, and Little Brown was literally the last person on our list, and they were the only people that said yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So I knew it would be a hard sell. I was very surprised that we sold it at all. I was really shocked. It got a very low advance, kind of like a bottom rung, I guess, YA advance. Um, Nobody was expecting it to take off, least of all me. So my editor, I mean, I just kind of went through the editorial process,
Mhm.
trying to hang on to there's a lot of external market pressure
Mhm.
on publishers, on traditional publishers in terms of the things that they know work well in the market,
Yeah.
and consequently, they come back to you and they sort of say, well, look, what if you tweak it a little bit this way or that way? But then if there might be some changes that you really don't want to make, and
Yeah.
and you kind of have to make a call on whether or not you think you want to make those changes.
Mhm.
And like I was saying, yeah, there were a few things about Not Your Sleep that I really wanted to retain. I wanted to keep a bit of space for Emma, the character. I didn't want to plunge into like romantic tension too early in the story.
Yep.
Um, in fact, I think one of the editorial comments was like, "Do we really need Simon?" Yeah.
Wow.
I
That
know.
would
It's
have been a
like to me, it was
completely
like,
different book.
yeah, he's kind
Yeah.
of really central to the plot. He's one of the key characters in the plot.
Yeah.
I mean, I consciously modeled the story around, Silence of the Lambs by
Mhm.
Thomas Harris. So I guess, Simon is my Hannibal Lecter and
Mhm.
Emma is my Clarice.
Mhm.
Um, and and yeah, so I was like, yes,
Yeah.
actually, we really need Simon. He's kind of important for the plot.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so that one was published. It started doing like kind of okay publishing sales numbers, like right out the gate. It was kind of like, oh yeah, okay. And then Barnes and Noble picked it up for like a book of the month.
Mhm.
And it just absolutely took off. People went wild, which was really amazing. And I really, that's one of the good things about traditional publishing, I
Mhm.
guess, is that they have those distribution channels that gets you into major bookstores
Yeah.
where you can take advantage of opportunities like that.
Mhm.
So as a consequence, Not to Sleep hit the New York Times bestseller list like a year after release.
That's awesome.
So Yeah, and very strange. That almost never happens. Like when you're trying to hit list,
Hmm.
yeah, in trad publishing terms, they call it hitting list.
Hmm.
It's often a strategy that's worked out by the publisher,
Hmm.
like even before the book's initial release.
Hmm.
So they're trying to make it gallop straight out the gate.
Hmm.
Yeah. To have a book hit list a year after after the initial release is almost unheard of. So
Yeah.
I was really not expecting
Hmm.
Nudge Sleep to hit the New York Times list. But that's, I guess that's the power of Barnes and Noble.
Hmm.
They have an enormous number of stores, and
Yeah.
they have great reach. They're kind of go-to in terms of where people go to buy physical copies.
Yeah.
So on the strength of that that book's success, so on the strength of the first book's success, I was halfway through writing the sequel and they were still umming and ahhing about whether or not they would take it.
Hmm.
The Little Brown, that is.
Hmm.
And then I was literally preparing to start releasing some chapters into my newsletter, perhaps in preparation for self-publishing the second book.
Hmm.
And then the book hit list. And then I contacted my agent and he was like, "Congratulations." I was like, "Great." I was like, "Oh, so, I'll just start sending out the chapters of Some Shall Break." And he was like, "Hold on there. You've just hit the New York Times list.
Hmm.
Everything's changed."
Hmm.
Um, so he went back to Little Brown and asked if they were interested in buying the sequel. And then, yeah, they bought the
Hmm.
sequel, Some Shall Break. Um, that one was published in 2022. And I think, yeah, that's right. And then I was like, okay, so I guess I'm writing a trilogy, so I'll start writing the next book. So I was about halfway through All Shall Mourn, writing All Shall Mourn, when Some Shall Break released. And we went back and forth with Little Brown about whether or not they would buy the third book. And they kind of, you know, in trad pub, you're always waiting for the receipts. So
Hmm.
your book might get published in, say your book is published in January, you're not going to get sales returns through traditional publishing channels for like about 3 months.
Okay.
So and it's going to take anywhere from like 18 to 24 months from the publisher buying your book
Hmm.
to it appearing on the shelf. So,
Right.
publishing is a very large, unwieldy, slow-moving machine.
Hmm.
So, and they have a very strict schedule for like they've got literally thousands of books coming down the pipe, and your
Hmm.
book has to fit somewhere in that schedule.
Yeah.
Um, so if they're going to wait 3 months before they make a decision on whether to pick up the sequel, and then the book's not going to be out probably for like another 2 years,
Hmm.
so somewhere in there, and then you've got to do editorial and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So we waited and waited and waited. Um, and then finally, um, I was like, look, if Little Brown aren't going to publish it, then I will publish it. So I started the processes of getting the book prepared for publication, I
Hmm.
guess. For indie publication, I started, talking to editors. I started talking to cover designers.
Hmm.
I started making a chapter release plan for my newsletter. So I wanted to feed a few chapters out to readers to get people excited before I release the book.
Yep.
And then look, we really waited for as long as we possibly could. And then finally, like I said to my agent, look, we really need the publisher to make a call on this, because if they're not going to fit my book in their schedule, then I have my own schedule now. I've already contacted the typesetter. I've already made
Hmm.
an initial cover brief for the cover artist.
Hmm.
Yeah, I am now on a schedule myself. So we need to have a decision about it. And then he went back and they said, no, probably not going to go for that one. I
Hmm.
mean, With a trilogy in traditional publishing, it's always going to be diminishing returns.
Hmm.
Yeah. So even if your first book sells 100,000 copies,
Hmm.
you're not going to probably you're unlikely to sell more than half of that
Hmm.
number of copies for the second book,
Yeah.
and then half again at maximum for the next book.
Yeah.
So with traditional publishing, it's not that my editor didn't like me or anything like that. I mean,
Yeah.
she was a lovely lady, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, traditional publishing is business,
Hmm.
and they have an accounting team that says, look, it really makes no sense for us financially to do
Hmm.
all of the work and put the financial costs, take the financial risk to publish this book
Hmm.
based on our estimated number of returns,
Hmm.
like how much we think we're going to get back for it.
Hmm.
Whereas, like, you know, okay, say they only estimated that All Shall Mourn would sell 20,000 copies.
Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm. Sorry. In the scheme of things, that's not a lot of copies for them. Yeah.
Hmm.
But for an indie published book, that's a lot
Yeah.
of copies.
Yeah.
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 So I was like, well, look, even if they choose not to release it, if I release it, I will probably, do okay out of that. So I was like, okay. And also financially it made sense. I knew I could do it on a reasonable budget.
Hmm.
And I'd already self-published 4 books previously.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew the ropes.
Yeah.
And then also at the end of the day, I wanted to finish writing the story, and I had a very dedicated team of readers out there who were like, we really, we would like to know what happens.
Yeah.
Um, the second book basically ends on a cliffhanger, and I just felt like it was monumentally unfair to leave people hanging at the end of the second book. I
Mhm.
was like, I just can't do that to people. I know how I would feel. If I was the reader of somebody else's series, I would be like, are you kidding me? So I was like, yeah, I think really
Mhm.
people have followed and been so incredibly supportive and kind.
Mhm.
And I felt like I can't cheat people out of that final book.
Yeah.
It's really important that you get to we want some closure.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. So and
Yeah.
it helps that you had a background in self-publishing too, because I feel like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I don't know, but I feel like it's pretty unique to have your first reaction be like, oh, well, I'm just going to do it myself then. I know how to do it. I've got everything lined up.
Yeah.
I have a schedule, and I'm gonna like the fact that you have the relationship directly with your readers and you've had a self-publishing background, I'm sure helped with that a
It
lot.
definitely helped. Like, I mean, it does help when you're independently publishing, when you're self-publishing, it helps to have an existing springboard. So I definitely wouldn't deny that being a traditionally published author first
Hmm.
helped to give me or helped to kick off a platform
Hmm.
and a readership for
Hmm.
me that I already had as a springboard to
Yeah.
self-publishing. But in terms of learning the ropes around self-publishing, I'd already done that before. I
Yeah.
self-published my first book 2017,
Mhm.
2016, 2017, and then I published 3 short, like um like noir kind of romances set in a
Mhm.
circus in
Oh, cool.
2018.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So they were all interrelated and they're all set in the same environment. So I was kind of playing with a cast of characters. And I really kind of did that as an experiment to see um, whether or not I like I I don't know what your experience with self-publishing is, but if you only do it once, you'll never remember the steps that you took.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
follow a certain number of steps, and it's
Mhm.
quite a complicated process.
Yeah.
And it's like doing anything. If you only do it once, the next time you go to do it, you'll be like, how did I do that
Yeah.
again? And I really felt like after I self-published my first book, I was like, I really want to burn this into my brain. This is
Yeah.
how it's done.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I went back and did it a couple more times. And then when it came to actually doing it this time, I was like, oh, I know how this works. It's okay. It's I didn't feel as nervous around it as I did the first time I did it. That's for sure.
Yeah. So
Mm.
how did you first get involved with your publisher? Because you said that you started with an Australian publisher, but then do you have a
Mm.
different agent in the US? And then None Shall Sleep was published
Yeah.
by Little Brown. How did you get started with traditional publishing, both in Australia and in the US?
In Australia, I pitched my first book onto the slush pile of Allen and Unwin in Australia. They were the most reputable children's publisher that I knew, children's and YA. And I basically got picked up off the slush pile, which is pretty
Oh, cool.
amazing. In Australia, the market, the industry is so much smaller. It's at least a fifth of the size of the US
Mhm.
industry. So you don't actually need an agent to approach
Really?
a publisher. Yeah, you can just send, like, if you're an Australian citizen, you can just send your book to the publisher and they'll just add it to the slush pile along with everything else.
Maybe I
And
should
then
do
quite
that.
yeah, go do it. Give it a
Yeah.
shot. I mean, I mean, I didn't have an agent like when I first started pitching to Australian publishers.
Mhm.
As soon as I started the pitching process, so I did contact some agents,
Mhm.
and of course was completely ignored, like, you know, is normal. When somebody randomly contacts an agent, they're like, "Oh, well, maybe we'll reply to them in 12 months or something."
Yeah.
Um, and then and then when my book got picked up by Allen and Unwin and they were like, "Oh, actually we are interested in publishing this."
Mhm.
I immediately contacted all of the agents that I'd emailed and said, "Look, I'm about to sign a contract with a major publisher in Australia. So if any of you are interested in representing me, yeah, get on board."
Mhm.
So I actually picked up an agent that way.
Okay.
Um, she was with an agency who served both Australian and US authors.
Mhm.
So they were kind of, across both of those markets. And yeah, I was with my first agent for, a number of years until about 2017, I think,
Mhm.
2018. And at that point, I'd published three books traditionally. I'd published I'd been included in one anthology, and then I published another book traditionally, which I'd hoped to kind of break into the US market. But um, yeah, at that point, my agent and I were kind of like, well, I feel like I don't feel like I'm really getting anywhere. So she and I parted ways.
Mhm.
And then I was at a real crossroads, I guess, around 2018, 2019.
Mhm.
And I was at writer's retreat with a bunch of friends, and another writer friend of mine said to me, well, I was like, I'm between agents. I don't have an agent. I have to get started writing something new. I have no idea what I'm going to write. Um, and this friend of mine said to me, well, look, you really should be pitching for the US market if you want to continue being self-sustaining as an author. I mean, that's one of the issues, I guess, with publishing in Australia, even traditionally.
Mhm.
There's just not enough of a market here. There's just not
Right.
enough. You can't make enough book sales to make a living,
Yeah.
you know? You have to be pitching into overseas markets.
Mhm.
Um, because we've only got like 25 million, 27 million people in Australia. So it's very limited
Mhm.
in terms of how many books you're going to be able to sell into that market
Right.
of that size. Um so I was like, okay, so I need to be pitching to the US. What am I going to write? And this friend of mine said, well, what's the book that, like, if this is it, if this is your last hurrah, like, if you could only write one more book, what would you write? And I was like, okay, I've always really wanted to write a YA serial killer thriller.
Mhm.
And they were like, yes, great, do that, write that. So I was basically let off the leash then,
Mhm.
to write None Shall Sleep. And
Mhm.
then wrote that book. pitched it to a US agent on the recommendation of another author friend. So,
Okay.
I'd been in the industry for 5 years,
Hmm.
and I had a few Australian author friends that I knew, and a
Hmm.
number of them were represented in the States.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine, Amy Kaufman, was she said, "Oh, why don't you pitch to my agent?" So that was the book. So Nudge Sleep was the book that I used to pitch
Okay.
to my current agent. And yeah, he was probably a bit crazy to take me on, but it worked out in the end.
What do you think I mean, this is kind of a personal, like, just I'm very curious, but what do you think is kind of the general industry, like how do they look upon like YA serial killer thrillers? Like, is there a market for that, or that people really like buying that?
Yeah.
Because I know you've had a big reader reception to None Shall Sleep.
Yeah. Look, I honestly think there's a market for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a matter of what genres are on trend.
Yeah.
Like there's always going to be a market for, well, you can write literally anything and
Hmm.
and find a market for it. I mean,
Yeah.
I never wrote Nudge Sleep with the idea of the the market in mind. I wrote it because it was the kind of book that I wanted to read when I was
Yeah.
15, 16, you
Yeah.
know. I was always really into dark subject matter when I was reading. I used to read a lot of horror. I used to, when I was a teenager, and I was like, okay, so I'm writing this book for me, basically.
Yeah.
And that proved to be actually the most successful thing I could have done,
Mhm.
like I think I think the tendency for a lot of new writers who are trying to break into the market is to
Mhm.
think that the weird quirks and niche interests that they have are not going to work in the
Mhm.
market. And so they have to kind of smooth everything over and rub off all of the sharp edges and kind of
Mhm.
glamorize everything. And I would say absolutely do not do that. Yeah. There is the niche weird thing that you love,
Yeah.
there's going to be a significant number of people who love that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, like, I mean, here's my Streets of Fire t-shirt. Like this is a movie that I've almost no, I mean, I don't know many people in person who have loved this film, but every time I go out in the street, someone's like, "Oh, I love that movie," and it's like, this is a random
Mhm.
movie that just disappeared. Like everybody's got niche interests. I would say just write the weird stuff, write the niche stuff, write the quirky stuff that is
Yeah.
unique to you, because that's actually there's always going to be people out there who find that appealing.
Yeah.
Um, but the traditional publishing market is always reaching for the things that are appealing to the most number of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're looking for the broadest common denominator.
Mhm.
Kind of like, what is the thing that we can write that is going to reach the most number of people? Whereas I think particularly for indie publishing, what you want to do is you don't want to like just kind of cast everything to the wind.
Mhm.
You're actually targeting your readership quite specifically
Oh yeah.
to the people who like the stuff that you like,
Yeah.
yeah, that you like to write.
Yeah.
And while even if that doesn't hold a lot of appeal for a traditional publishing house,
Mhm.
there will be enough people who like that stuff
Mhm.
to sustain your career as an
Yeah.
indie published author.
Yeah.
You can still make a living on that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be my
No, I
advice
love
to
that.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So from a just like kind of technical standpoint, how did you approach self-publishing? Like what platforms did you use? Did you like use
Mm.
KDP, Ingram Spark? Like did you use print on demand? How what did you do?
I I used KDP for ebook and paperback
Mhm.
in all markets. I
Okay.
used Draft to Digital
Mhm.
to hit all of the ebook. I used Draft to Digital just for ebook,
Yeah.
to hit the platforms that I personally find a real pain in the butt
Yeah.
to do one at a time on my
Yeah.
own. Like Apple is really hard to navigate.
Love draft to
Um,
digital. Yeah.
yeah. So I use them, and particularly for things like library markets like
Mhm.
Overdrive,
Oh yeah.
Libby, all of that sort of stuff. So I wanted this book to be accessible in libraries or on library apps. So yeah, I put it out through D2D.
Mhm.
And they're just it's a very straightforward, efficient platform, which
Yeah.
I sort of think takes the pain out of trying to load everything onto individual platforms because there's so many now too.
Yep.
Like, there'd be like 20 different
Mhm.
distributor platforms,
Absolutely.
and it would be a massive time suck to do it
Yeah.
all yourself. I mean, you
Yeah.
can do it. You get a slightly better percentage, but man, is it worth it for that
Yeah.
little bit of extra, for that extra dollar or whatever?
Mhm.
Um,
Are you doing an
and
audiobook?
Good question. I was just going to say, first of all, I also do Ingram Spark
Oh yeah.
for
Oh, sorry, I
paperback
didn't mean to cut you
distribution.
off.
Yeah, no, no. I also do it because there are people who don't want to buy paperback through Amazon.
Hmm.
And I'm speaking specifically not just to individual readers, but also bookstores. So you can really only get your book into Barnes and Noble through Ingram Spark, I think is the most efficient way to do that. So yeah, do I want to have an audiobook? Yes. Um, I actually have handballed that one to my agent. This is where it's great being hybrid.
Yeah.
I have a traditional publishing agent,
Hmm.
and I had a meeting with him last week, and he was like, "This book is selling numbers," and I was like, "Yes, yes, it is." And I said, why don't we try and hit up Audible or Belinda or something like that to,
Hmm.
see if they'd be interested in picking up the audiobook licensing rights.
Oh, cool.
So that's what we're discussing right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there'll be potentially some interest there, and I mean, it might depend on sales. I also, there's also the option of making the audiobook yourself.
Hmm.
You can do that. You can go through what is it on KDP? Is it like
ACX.
ASX?
Yeah,
ACX?
ACX.
Yeah. The only problem is I don't know if that platform is actually available in Australia. Like I think it
Oh, I
might be
didn't think about
US
that.
based. Yeah. I think you have to jump over a few other hoops to
Hmm.
create your own audiobook here in Australia
Right.
because some of the features of KDP ACX aren't available here in Australia.
Right.
Which is annoying.
Yeah.
Maybe they will have fixed it by the time I get around to making an audiobook. If we can't license the audiobook rights to Audible or Belinda or something like that, then I will be looking into making an audiobook myself, simply because it's such an enormous um part of the market now,
Yeah.
you know. Like audio is really a critical part of the market. It's growing too.
Yeah.
So you really kind of do need to have an audiobook.
Yeah.
Um, it is just an additional amount of hard work.
Yeah.
And also
Upfront
I've
costs
never,
too.
yeah, it's enormously expensive,
Yeah.
compared to just releasing an ebook or a paperback, it's significantly more financial risk.
Yeah.
So I'd have to hit a certain threshold of sales, I think, and in order to make it kind of financially worth it for me to
Yeah.
create an audiobook myself. Yeah,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Are
yeah.
you finding it hard to get Barnes and Noble to stock your book, even though you have it available through Ingram Spark, or have they actually been like, have you been finding it easier to stock with indie bookstores? Because I find it really difficult to get bookstores to stock my books, and when I finally get them to
Yeah.
agree, then
Mm-hmm.
they'll maybe like buy and order a couple of them, and Ingram Spark will print them, and then if they don't move the copies, like they'll just kind of stick
Mm-hmm.
them in a back shelf, and then if they don't sell,
Yeah.
then they'll just send
And
them
then
all back to me, and then I have to pay like $300 for the printing of the books and
and
get
then you
stuck
get
with all
hit
these
for the
books.
returns. I
Yep.
know. I mean, traditional publishing hates returns as well.
Hmm.
They're like, okay, so we've sold 100 copies, but we assume that at least 25 of them will be returned at some point.
Hmm.
But they're taking the hit for that. Whereas if you're an indie publisher, like taking the hit for any kind of returns is really expensive.
Yeah.
Look, I was the first couple of times I independently published, I was tried to make the books as available as possible to bookstores. Whereas this time I was like, no, screw it. If you want if you want a copy of the book, this book is non-returnable for one.
Mhm.
Um, so I was basically like, look, I am literally a one person band. I
Yeah.
cannot afford to take the hit on
Yeah.
returns. If you want to order one copy, I don't mind. Then if you can't on-sell that copy, then, I mean, it means that the bookstore is unlikely to order like 20 copies or something, but they were never going to do that in the first place.
Yeah.
They were always only ever going to order like one or two copies.
Right.
So, at max.
Mhm.
So what I've done instead is while I've made it available through Ingram Spark, which means that Barnes and Noble can order it,
Mhm.
what that usually means is it's entirely reliant on individual readers to go into their local Barnes and Noble and say, I really want a copy of this book. Can you order it for me? You
Mhm.
know? And then what will usually happen is they'll be like, oh, okay, we've had one or two orders for this book, so maybe we'll pick up an extra one.
Mhm.
Yeah. And even if they've only got one on the shelf, then they're not so worried about it being non-returnable because based on the number of orders that they've had, they figure that they'll probably shift it at some point.
Yeah.
And either way, it's not a huge investment if they're losing out on like the sale of one book.
Yeah.
Um, but I did want to make sure, like, because I had a number of readers who were invested in being able to buy the book in Barnes and Noble.
Mhm.
And I also had a number of people contacting me who were like, I love this book. I'm a bookseller at Barnes and Noble.
Oh,
Can you
that's
please
cool.
make sure that we can access it? And
Mhm.
I was like, yeah, okay. So there's sufficient interest there for me to make it available. I kind of ummed and ahed about going with Ingram Spark because I find they can be really hard to work with.
Their
I
website
don't
is just awful. It's like
Their
so
website is
bad.
terrible. Their publisher compensation is like, oh, really? We'll
Yeah.
compensate you. We'll give you money at some point, but we don't know how much exactly that will be and
Exactly.
when you will receive it.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is not how it works.
Yeah.
And then you go to KDP and it's like everything is so smooth and it's
Mhm.
so easy to access. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
the dream. But
And then they'll hold your book for processing, and then they'll like do all
I
these
know.
stupid things. And like it'll take 24 hours for one book, and then it'll take three
Yeah.
weeks for another one. So it's like impossible to build into your schedule. It just like has me banging my head against the table every time I have to deal with it.
I really wanted to avoid working with them again. I've worked with them for 4 books. And with this book, I was like, I'm not doing it again. I'm not putting myself through it again.
Hmm.
But because I had so many requests from Barnes and Noble readers, I was like, oh God, okay, I guess I'm going with Ingrid Spark again.
Hmm.
And actually, look, it helps me as well. Here in Australia, I can order through Amazon or to get supplies of my own book because
Hmm.
I also am planning to have signed copies available on my website.
Yep.
So I wanted to be able to access stock,
Mhm.
which I can get printed through Amazon here in Australia, but I also do events, like I do school events and stuff like that.
Right.
So school events or book festivals, where often the organizer of the festival will come to me and say, look, we need 25 copies of your book for this event.
Hmm.
And, rather than sending them to, usually that's organized through a bookseller at the event and they will never order through Amazon.
Hmm.
So I wanted to have an independent way of being able to say, okay, I can order 25 copies through Ingram. I can get them shipped by Ingram to the location.
Yep.
Yeah, and that just kind of smooths that path.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, there were a couple of reasons why it was useful to work with Ingram again.
Yeah.
And in the end, the advantages outweighed the disadvantages, but boy, they
Yeah.
can make your life difficult
Yeah.
when they want to. For
Yeah. So did you find
real.
yourself having to do a lot of marketing for this book, or did kind of the marketing and readership that you'd built through the first two books just
Mm.
carry over and drive this launch?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Um, Look, traditional publishing is is not going to provide you with the marketing support that you think you will need or get. Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, I think we already, I think if you're paying attention to the industry, um, you'll realize from the Department of Justice case, the PRH, the Penguin Random House merger, proposed merger with Simon and Schuster, there was the big antitrust court case
Yeah.
around that. And there was a lot of revealing information that came out in the courtroom about the way they um, plan, schedule, market, and all of this sort of stuff. And one of the things that came out was basically unless you're a lead title, so unless your book has been bought for a significant amount of money, and we're talking 250 to $500,000,
Hmm.
yeah, basically you're on your own with marketing. So, anything under that kind of advanced threshold, it's not really going to, I mean, affect their bottom line either way if they invest money in your marketing. So yeah, I mean the marketing that you're really getting through a traditional publishing house is distribution.
Hmm.
Yeah, they can make sure that copies of your book are in every single bookstore
Yeah.
from here to, from the east to the west coast.
Hmm.
So so just that visibility
Yeah.
in regular bookstores is kind of the primary marketing that you're going to get from a
Hmm.
trad pub house.
Yeah.
Also, they're going to they're also going to do some behind the scenes stuff where they contact libraries or
Hmm.
help get you into book festivals, maybe, where you have a little bit more exposure as well. And having that pitching to libraries or librarians organizations, that's actually going to be quite helpful too.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of, like marketing, you're
Hmm.
not really going to get a lot in the way of promotion apart from, I don't know, maybe an email blast or a couple of social media assets. That's about it.
Right.
Which is something that I can do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I make social media assets pretty regularly
Yeah.
and I can do all of that stuff myself.
Yeah.
And in terms of email, like um I started my newsletter about, I don't know, it was a long time ago. It was probably like 8 years ago or something. I started blogging and then I started putting out a newsletter,
Hmm.
and I still put out two newsletters every month.
Hmm.
And it's really the people who've supported me through the newsletter that have been they've been the ones who've been kind of evangelizing
Hmm.
for the book all over the internet. I
Yeah.
really have done very little. I've posted stuff on Instagram.
Hmm.
I've posted a couple of videos on TikTok.
Hmm.
I've done a little bit of posting on, other platforms, Threads and Blue Sky. But really, I mean, I don't have huge social media reach.
Hmm.
It's really up to the readers
Yeah.
and I think as any author, whether you're with TradPub or your self-pub, it's that connection with readers that is the most important thing
Absolutely.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, without the readers, this book would not exist.
Hmm.
I mean, and I mean that quite literally. I would not have been able to write the finale if people hadn't been asking me for it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have published it if people weren't like contacting me all the time saying, "Look, we really need to know the end of the story."
Yeah.
And it's been that connection with readers that's been critical to the promotion as well.
Mhm.
People like I put out a half-assed kind of like, oh, well, look, ARCs will be available in January, and literally had like, dozens of people contacting me saying, I would really like to have an ARC, and
Mhm.
can we, feature it on whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, people have kind of run with it.
Yeah.
Word of mouth is going to always be the best form of promotion.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what you get when you build your own fan base, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Well, because I'd imagine it's hard too, because like if a traditional publisher doesn't do very much marketing and then they also take a bigger cut, than you
Mm-hmm.
be able to take as a self-published author. And so you can't
Yeah.
do things like run ads to book one or do because they wouldn't be profitable because the money wouldn't
Yeah.
be really coming back to you. You'd have to give a lot more to the publisher. So how would like what has been most effective for you in building fandom and like having word of mouth spread and like building a community of readers? Because that seems like it's probably the most powerful marketing tactic as a traditionally published author put in that position where there isn't
Yeah.
a ton you can do other than go on social media and like try to connect with readers.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Look, like I've tried to concentrate primarily just on one platform, like everything goes through Instagram,
Mhm.
basically. But I mean, and obviously I have a website and stuff like that. So I have kind of a central kind of hub where people can go if they want to try and find information. But
Mhm.
most of the communication on social media that I'm doing is through Instagram.
Mhm.
Um, but it's the newsletter that's really
Yeah.
been the key element of building, I guess, a readership or a platform or a fan base, like, and I don't know. I mean, newsletters, like if I had to make one suggestion, it would be like start a newsletter like
Mhm.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Um, it's creating that connection with the people who are actually reading your books.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing
Mhm.
that's going to serve you regardless of which type of publishing you're doing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, and make it as enjoyable for yourself as possible. Don't turn it into a chore. Oh no, now I've got to write a newsletter. It's got to
Yeah.
be something that like, okay, I get a chance to talk to people who are on the same wavelength as me,
Yeah.
who like the same stuff as me.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're writing to your niche interests and you're attracting the people who are also interested in those things. So
Mhm.
you have a lot in common with those people.
Yeah.
And yeah, you all like the same stuff. So you can nerd out in your newsletter about you know, the horror movies that I watched last week or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
people are going to get that.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm going really broad, it's not going to hit as effectively,
Yeah.
and you're going to waste a lot of energy.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that would be the key thing. And advertising, yeah, look, I actually have done no advertising so far.
Mhm.
I'm just only now thinking about putting out some KDP ads,
Mhm.
some Amazon ads, just to kind of goose things a little bit in the week post release.
Mhm.
So, but I probably won't put in, you know, heaps of money into an
Yeah.
advertising um blitz or anything like that. I'll
Yeah.
just keep, honestly, it's the old story, front list sells back list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this book coming out is going to spur people to pick up this book and this
Mhm.
book and any other book that I sell.
Yeah.
So and I mean, it's kind of it feels a bit weird advertising this book anyway, because it's like, oh, come and, read the third book in a trilogy. It's like, um, what I should be doing is advertising the first book, because once I can get people interested in the first book, then,
Yeah.
there'll be a flow-on effect.
Yeah. It's
Um,
tricky though because you have the first book with the publisher. Like that's what I do. I
yeah,
only
I
ever run
can't.
ads to book one, but all of my
Yeah,
books
yeah.
are published.
I mean, I can't even run ads to book one because the publisher is the one who's in control of that
Yeah.
account, So all I can do at this stage is I can advertise book three, or I can advertise, well, you know, I can use graphic assets that show all three books. Yeah.
Right.
And sort of say, okay, the finale of the series is now out. Look, there's the rest of the series. Go and
Right.
get them.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, my last question was going to be like, do you have one really big piece of advice for people that are looking to build community and self-publish? But you just answered that. So, so
Yeah,
we've
get a
covered.
newsletter. Do it.
Yeah, I mean, a newsletter is just so important. That was the first thing that I did, and it took me a long time to actually get comfortable emailing people. And still,
Yeah.
like, I'm such an introvert that it's really hard for me to manage like a social media and a mailing list and a YouTube and everything. Like, I always burn out on things. and I'll
I don't
find
know how you do video. I find that amazing. I'm really video averse. I think, like I'm a little bit older than you, and I really did not grow up in the video generation. So, making kind of casual TikToks and stuff, I'm always going to feel a little bit uncomfortable doing that sort of stuff. But honestly, I don't think there's been an author that, oh, I don't know, maybe there's been an author who's broken out on TikTok through their own videos, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be other people talking about your book
Yeah.
that's gonna make the difference.
Yeah.
Me getting on TikTok and kind of like, singing and dancing around my book is not gonna
Yeah.
sell more copies. It's gonna be whether or not other people pick it up and run with it.
Yeah.
So, I really feel like the momentum is not on, it's not my doing, it's not my
Yeah.
responsibility. And in some ways that's kind of freeing.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not a hugely social person either. I
Hmm.
find I had to really sit down and work out a style of communicating with people that felt more genuine to me,
Yeah.
when I'm writing my newsletters. Um, the only thing that I figured out was that like I actually subscribed to like a dozen authors' newsletters
Hmm. I
just to
do
sort of
that
sit
too.
down and
Yep.
see what other people were doing. Like, am I
Hmm.
doing this right? Um, but what I found, the ones that I just continually unsubscribed from ones that weren't interesting me.
Hmm.
And then the ones that stuck, I was kind of like, well, what is this? What is it about these people's newsletters that are really grabbing me, and it's almost always, here's this niche weird thing that I
Hmm.
like that you will probably like too, I hope.
Yeah.
And also just a more kind of intimate, personal, genuine style, I
Yeah.
guess, in writing. And like I said, I don't want it to be something that I'm like, oh God, I have to write the
Mhm.
newsletter. I want it to be something like where I sit down and I'm having a coffee with a friend or something,
Yeah.
and you're kind of catching them up on what you've been doing for the last month.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the style that I went with.
Yeah.
That was what worked for me anyway.
Mhm.
And it'll work differently for other people. Probably work, your style will be completely different,
Mhm.
depending on the type of people that you're trying to talk to. And
Yeah.
and yeah, just I don't know. Um, I think that's about it. I think it's really just about making that connection between you as a person and the other person on the who's receiving those words,
Yeah.
it's the same as writing a book. You're writing for yourself in a lot
Mhm.
of ways.
Yeah.
And the people who read and stick with you are going to be the ones who are really the people who are on your wavelength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about all of these things for so long. This
It
has been
was really
so much
nice.
fun, and I've learned so much. And it's just, you're absolutely amazing, and your books are
Thank you.
unbelievable. And I am just so grateful that you took the time to come on the channel and talk with me and have these conversations. So
I
thank you.
was really delighted that you asked me, so thank you so much. I don't often get out and get a chance to talk about craft and talk about the back end,
Mhm.
parts of making books. So yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and I hope everyone listening has had a good time.
Yeah. Well, do you want to quickly tell people where they can find you too? Like where, like what your Instagram handle is and how to
Yeah.
subscribe to your newsletter?
That's a good idea. I totally forgot about that. So my website is elliemarney.com, obviously. And my Instagram is probably my most outward facing platform. So I'm just, Ellie Marney on that as well, at Ellie Marney. On pretty much everything except TikTok, where I'm Ellie Marney author. So yeah,
Mhm.
and I'm on all the things, but I dip in and out of them fairly frequently,
Yeah.
except for
Me
Instagram.
too.
It's the only regular thing.
Mhm.
So my newsletter is called The Black Hand,
Mhm.
and I also have a paywall newsletter called Nail Biters, which people subscribe to if they're really into, like, I do a lot of behind the scenes sort of talk there, and people doing my, people who have signed up for Nail Biters tend to get a little bit of an early look at everything. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
All right, awesome. I will link everything in the description of both of the videos too, so people will be able to find them. But
Thank you. Thank you so much.